The most public moment of my life lasted 11 seconds, and I have replayed every one of them for 5 years. I was 22, standing in the marble rotunda of Ashgrove Academy in a borrowed gown, and the woman I had let mark me 3 months before looked me in the eyes in front of 400 people and said, clearly, so the whole room could hear it, "I don't know what you think we were. You were a scholarship case my family let me tutor." And then Marlowe Ashgrove, the golden alpha heir, the frost of Ashgrove, the woman whose bond mark was at that exact moment still warm under my collar, turned her back on me and walked to her mother's side and let the whole graduating class watch me understand in real time that I had been a secret she was now willing to kill in public to survive. I did not make a sound. That is the part I'm still proud of.
Welcome, everyone! Don't forget to subscribe to the channel!
400 people waited for the scholarship Omega to sob, to beg, to make the scene that would prove I had reached above my station. And I stood in my borrowed gown with her mark burning against my throat, and I did not give them one single tear. I picked up my diploma from a dean who could not meet my eyes. I walked out of the rotunda into the cold, and I did not set foot on Ashgrove ground again for 5 years, until the reunion, until the night the coldest alpha in that same marble room crossed the floor in front of everyone who had watched me fall, and went down on one knee. I know how it sounds. I know the shape of the story you think you're about to hear. The poor girl, the rich girl, the public heartbreak, the glow up, the revenge, and some of that is true. But it is not a story about revenge in the end. And it is not really a story about a scholarship and an inheritance. It is a story about a bond that 2 people spent 5 years trying to kill from 2 different kinds of dark and could not. You have to feel the whole weight of the 11 seconds before the kneeling means anything. So let me take you all the way back to the beginning, to a girl who knew better than to want. My name is Effie Marsh, and I did not belong at Ashgrove Academy, and everyone there made certain I never forgot it. I was an Omega from a mill town 3 hours north, the daughter of a woman who cleaned other people's houses for a living. And I was at Ashgrove on a full scholarship that covered the tuition and none of the 1,000 small humiliations that came with it. I kept my head down. I worked in the dining hall for my meal plan, ladling soup for girls who would not have recognized me if you put my face on a coin. I told myself the degree was a door, that I only had to survive the 4 years, and I did not. I promised myself this every single day. I did not let myself want one single thing at Ashgrove that Ashgrove could take away from me. Because Ashgrove could take anything. That was the first thing you learned there, if you came in the way I came in. The other students had a way of saying the word scholarship like it was a diagnosis, a soft, pitying thing they draped over you in front of teachers so they could be cruel and generous in the same breath. There were the ski trips I couldn't go on, and the coats I couldn't afford, and the winter formals where I served the punch instead of drinking it. I learned to make myself small, to move through the marble halls like a draft nobody had decided to close the window on, and I got so good at it that by my final year I was almost invisible, which is its own kind of safety and its own kind of grief, and which is exactly why what happened next should have been impossible. Because there was Marlowe. You have to understand what she was in that place to understand how impossible it was that she ever looked at me twice. Marlowe Ashgrove was the last heir of the family the school was named after. The Ashgroves had endowed the rotunda, the library, the observatory, the very ground under our feet. She was an alpha of the cold and total kind, tall, with blue-black hair she wore loose, and eyes the pale, exact blue of ice over deep water. And she moved through Ashgrove like weather the rest of us were only allowed to stand under. She did not raise her voice because she had never once in her life needed to. When Marlowe Ashgrove walked into a room, alphas measured themselves against her and lost. Betas lowered their eyes, and omegas either feared her or wanted her from a distance. They knew better than to close. I wanted her from a distance. Of course I did. Everyone did. That was the safe thing, the permitted thing, wanting Marlowe Ashgrove the way you want a life you were not born into, uselessly, from the wrong side of a marble hall. I knew her schedule the way you know weather. I knew she took her coffee alone in the observatory at dawn, because I saw her there once through the glass when I was carrying breakfast supplies across the frozen quad. And I knew the way her jaw set when her mother's name came up. And I knew she never let anyone stand too close. What I did not know, what I never once let myself imagine in 3 years of careful invisibility, was that she had been watching me back. I found that out on a night in October of our final year, in the dining hall after closing, when I was mopping the long stone floor alone. I looked up and she was standing in the doorway in the dark, still in her coat, watching me, and she said the first thing she ever said to me that was only for me. "You're the only person in this entire school who has never once tried to make me like her," she said. 3 years, not once. Everyone else performs for me. You look at the floor. And I stood there in the empty dining hall with a mop in my hands, and my heart going like a fist against a door, 21 years old, and so tired of being invisible that the truth simply fell out of me before I could stop it. "Because you can't afford me," I said. I heard the words leave my mouth and I wanted to die. It was the most honest thing I had said out loud in 3 years, and it was to the single most dangerous person I could have said it to. And Marlowe Ashgrove, who I had never once in 3 years seen surprised by anything, went very still in the doorway. I would learn later that this was her tell, the stillness that came over her before she let herself have a thing she had decided she wanted. That was the beginning. That was the first stone of everything, laid down on a dining hall floor at midnight by a girl who had never in her life been allowed to want anything out loud. I should have run. Everything I had promised myself for 3 years said run. She is the one thing at Ashgrove that can take everything. She is the whole institution wearing a beautiful face. You will be the mess she is bored of by spring. And instead, I stood in the dark with my heart in my teeth, and I let the most impossible person in that marble world look at me like I was a person, and I did not run. And by the time she left the dining hall an hour later, I was already lost. And I think we both knew it. What we became over that autumn and winter, I have never had a clean word for. It was secret, and it had to be. An Ashgrove Heir and a scholarship Omega was not a scandal. It was a category error. The kind of thing that would end my scholarship and her inheritance in the same afternoon. So we lived in the margins of that enormous school. We learned every place the cameras didn't reach and every hour the halls went empty. And in those stolen margins, I learned the thing that no one else at Ashgrove would have believed if I had stood in the rotunda and screamed it, that the frost of Ashgrove was not cold at all, that she had been raised by a mother who ran their family like a hostile takeover, and permitted her daughter nothing warm, nothing soft, nothing that could be used against her. And that with me, in the dark, in the cold, in the places nobody watched, Marlowe Ashgrove was starving. I remember the observatory most. She had a key. Of course she did, her family had built it. And on the coldest nights, we would climb up under the great dome, and she would open the roof to the freezing sky, and we would lie on the floor under a spill of stars that the light pollution of the whole rest of my life had never let me see. And she would talk. That was the thing that undid me more than any of the rest of it. Not that the untouchable air touched me, but that she talked to me, low in the dark, told me things I later understood she had never told a living soul. That she hated the company, that she had a photographic memory for numbers and a mother who used it like a tool, that she had decided at 14 that wanting things was a weakness she could not afford, and that I was the first thing in a decade she had let herself want, and it terrified her every single day. And I remember the boathouse, the old one, down at the frozen edge of the lake, where nobody went in winter. She would build a fire in the little iron stove, and we would sit wrapped in one blanket with the ice creaking white outside. And she would learn me the way she learned everything, completely and exactly and on purpose. The shape of my hands, the town I came from, the mother I sent half my dining hall wages home to, the particular way I had of going quiet when something mattered too much to risk saying wrong. No one at Ashgrove had ever once been curious about me. I had been a draft in the hallway for 3 years. And here was the coldest, most impossible woman in the school, learning me by firelight, like I was the only text that had ever interested her. And I fell so far and so fast that by December I had forgotten every promise I ever made myself about wanting things Ashgrove could take. The back stairs of the library were the most dangerous place we went. And so, of course, they became the place I loved best. There was a landing halfway up where the cameras didn't reach, and a tall, cold window that looked out over the whole white quad. And we would stand there in the dark between the stacks, close enough to share one breath, and she would tell me the names of the constellations we couldn't see for the clouds. It was reckless in a way the observatory and the boathouse weren't. People used that library at all hours, and any one of them could have come up those stairs and ended both our lives with a single glance. And I think that was exactly why she took me there. The Frost of Ashgrove, who had spent her whole life being careful, had found one person she wanted to be reckless for, and she could not stop, and neither could I. We were young, and we were sure we were the exception. And I have never once in 5 years been able to be truly angry at the 2 children who stood on those stairs and believed the world would let them keep it. I have to tell you about her scent, because it becomes the whole story later. Marlowe smelled of cold cedar and clean snow, and something warmer underneath, banked low like a fire behind glass. And the first time I got close enough to catch it, it reached some animal thing in me I had spent my whole careful life keeping quiet, and turned it toward her like a needle finding north. And she told me once, her mouth against my hair in the dark of the observatory with the stars pouring down through the open roof, that I smelled like wood smoke and warm honey, and the one word she never said to anyone. Home, she said. And she said it the way you make a confession, like it frightened her. And it should have, because an Ashgrove is not allowed to have a home her mother did not choose for her. I let myself hope. That is the part I'm hardest on, when I am hard on myself. Not the wanting I forgive, but the hoping. Because by that winter I had begun to believe, in the warm, reckless dark of the boathouse, that there was a version of the future where we simply left, where she walked away from the company, and I walked away from the scholarship, and the 2 of us went somewhere with no marble in it and built a life out of firelight and honey, and the one word she was not allowed to say. I never said it out loud. Neither did she. But I built it anyway, in secret, the way I had learned to want in secret, a whole future, load-bearing, made entirely of a thing I had promised myself I would never let Ashgrove hand me, because Ashgrove could always take it back. She marked me in February. I want to be careful about how I tell this, because it was not reckless. It was the opposite. It was the most deliberate thing either of us had ever done. We were in the boathouse with the lake frozen white outside, and she held my face in both her cold hands, and she said, I am going to tell my mother about you at graduation. In front of everyone. In the rotunda, where she can't make it disappear quietly, where she'll have to choose between me and her merger with the whole school watching. And she set her mouth to the bong gland at my throat, and I felt her decide. And I said yes, before she had even finished asking. And she marked me. A real claim. Not the promise of one, the thing itself. For 3 months, I walked around that cold marble school with the warmest secret in the world burning under my collar. And I believed her with my whole chest. I believed in the rotunda and the announcement and the choosing me in public. I planned what I would wear. I let myself, for the first time in my careful life, count on something. I would catch her eye across a crowded dining hall while I ladled soup and she pretended not to know me. And the mark at my throat would warm, and it was like carrying a lit coal through a snowstorm. No one could see it, but I was never once cold. 3 months. I gave myself 3 whole months of believing that the impossible thing was going to hold. And the entire time, at the top of a glass tower in the city, her mother was already dismantling it, board by board, with the patience of a woman who has never once lost. Here is what I did not know. In those 3 warm months, while I was busy being happier than I had ever been in my life, I did not know about the merger. I did not know that Vivian Ashgrove, Marlowe's mother, the head of the family, a woman I had seen exactly twice, and who had looked through me both times as though I were a coat rack that had learned to stand upright, had spent that entire year building an alliance between the Ashgroves and the Calloway family, sealed by an engagement. And I did not know that the engagement was Marlowe's. While I was learning the shape of her hands by firelight, her mother was quietly selling her daughter's whole future to save the family fortune, and had already found a buyer, and was simply waiting for the right moment to collect. I need you to understand Vivian Ashgrove, because she is the cold weather the whole rest of the story happens under. She was not loud, and she was not obviously cruel, and that is what made her terrible. She ran the family the way a surgeon runs a theater. Everything measured, nothing wasted. No feeling permitted to touch the instruments. She had raised Marlowe to believe that warmth was a liability that other people used against you. And she had proof, because she had spent 30 years using it against everyone. And she had known about me for weeks by the time she moved. She had photographs, she had dates, she had the boathouse. And she did the coldest thing of all with what she knew. She did nothing, and she waited. Because a patient, cruel person understands that the way to hurt someone most is to let them believe, right up until the last possible second, that they are going to be happy. She chose the week before graduation. I learned this later, all of it, in pieces, over years, but I will tell it to you here, in order, so that you understand exactly what Marlowe was standing in when she said those 11 seconds to me in the rotunda. Vivian called her daughter up to the cold glass office at the top of the family building, and she laid it out with the flat precision of a woman reading terms into a contract. The family was 3 months from ruin, leveraged, overextended, one bad quarter from losing everything, including the endowment, including the school. The Calloway merger was the only thing that could save it. And she knew, she said, about the scholarship Omega. She turned a folder around on the desk so Marlowe could see the photographs, and then she made the offer that was not an offer. "You can have the girl," Vivian told her daughter, "in that office with the whole cold city spread out below the glass, and watch me destroy her and her mother and everything she has ever built or might ever build. I will have her scholarship revoked for a fabricated honor violation. I will make certain the fabrication follows her to every school and every kitchen and every job she ever applies to for the rest of her life. I will ruin her mother's little cleaning business in the same week, for spite, because I can. Or," she said, and she slid a single piece of paper across the desk, "my scholarship file, with a red flag already prepared, one signature from ending my life. You can let her walk out of that rotunda with a clean diploma and a clean record and an open future, and she will hate you, and she will be free. Those are the only 2 versions of her that exist now. You have until graduation," she said, and she did not raise her voice once, and that was the whole of it. I have thought, for 5 years, about what I would have done if someone had turned that folder around on a desk in front of me. I have decided, honestly, that I do not know. Because here's the cruelty engineered into it, the thing it took me 3 years to be able to say out loud. There was no version where Marlowe got to keep me and I got to survive. Vivian had built the trap so that love and ruin were the same door. Any warmth Marlowe showed me, any sadness, any hint that the bond was still alive, and her mother would know the choosing hadn't worked, and she would finish me and my mother both. The only thing that would buy my safety was Marlowe convincing the entire world, convincing me, that there had never been anything real to save. So she made it ugly. That is what I understand now, and could not understand for years. Marlowe chose the version of me that got to live, and to make it hold, she had to burn the most real thing she had ever had in the most humiliating way she could invent, in front of 400 witnesses, so completely that even I would believe it, because if I believed it, I would leave clean. And if I left clean, her mother would let me go. A kind ending would have killed me. A sad ending would have killed me. Only a cruel, total, public execution of us would satisfy Vivian Ashgrove that the bond was dead and the debt was paid. So the coldest girl I ever loved walked into that rotunda and paid it in the only currency her mother accepted, which was my heart, in public in 11 seconds. But I didn't know any of that in the rotunda. In the rotunda, I only knew the 11 seconds. It was the last morning. Caps and gowns, the string quartet, 400 families under the Great Dome. My own mother 3 hours away because I had told her not to make the drive. And I had believed, right up until Marlowe's eyes found mine across the marble, that this was the morning she chose me. I had worn the borrowed gown, and I had touched the warm mark at my throat, and I had thought, now. And she crossed the floor toward me, and the whole warm, impossible future stood up inside my chest. And then she looked at me with a face I had never seen her wear, a flat, cold public face, and she said the words and turned her back and walked to her mother's side, and I felt the future die standing up. I don't know what you think we were. You were a scholarship case my family let me tutor, and then the sound. I will never forget the sound the room made, that low, delighted, collective intake of breath that a crowd makes when it watches someone finally get put in her place. And her bond mark was still warm on my throat while she walked away. And I made my one good decision, the decision I have built an entire life on since. I did not give them a single tear. I picked up my diploma from a dean who could not meet my eyes, and I turned, and I walked out of the rotunda into the cold, and I kept walking, and I did not look back at the marble for 5 years. I want to tell you what the first year without her was, because you cannot understand who walked into that reunion until you understand who crawled out of that rotunda. Here is the thing no one tells you about a bond. It does not care about your dignity. A severed bond, and I believed it severed, I believe she had thrown me into the snow, is not a metaphor. It is a physical withdrawal, a low, constant grief lodged under the collarbone, a body-deep certainty that half of you has been amputated and is still impossibly aching in the place where it used to be attached. I did not know that was coming. Nobody warns the scholarship girl that the punishment for reaching too high is that your own body will mourn the fall for months, whether or not your pride will let it. I went home to the mill town. I moved back into my mother's small house, and I got a job at a diner off the highway. And I poured coffee for truckers at 5 a.m. with the mark burning under my collar. And I told my mother a version of the story that had no alpha in it at all. A version where Ashgrove was just cold, and I was just glad to be done. Because I could not make my mouth form the true words. Some griefs are too big to be spoken to the people who love you most, because saying them out loud would make your mother's face do a thing you could not survive watching. So I carried it alone, in a diner, at dawn, for a year. And every single night that first year, I did the same thing. I would put my hand flat over the mark at my throat, the one that was supposed to have faded by now, the one that everyone says fades when a bond breaks. And I would feel it still there, still warm, still stubbornly, uselessly, infuriatingly alive. And I would lie in my childhood bed and feel 3 things at once, layered like sediment. On top, hatred. For her, for what she'd done, for the 11 seconds. Under that, shame. That I had let it happen, that I had believed, that I had been exactly the reaching scholarship girl they'd all known I was. And under both, at the very bottom where I could not reach it to kill it, the third thing, that I missed her so much I could not breathe, and that the missing did not care in the slightest what she had done. And then, slowly, I did the only thing I have ever known how to do, which is work. I had waited tables and ladled soup my whole life. It turned out, when I finally paid attention, that I could cook, really cook. There was a line cook at the diner, an old woman named Rosa, who had run kitchens in 3 countries before she landed pouring gravy off a highway. And she saw something in the way I broke down a case of tomatoes, and she started teaching me on the slow afternoons. Knife work, heat, patience. The way a thing transforms if you give it exactly the right amount of fire and not 1 second more. I did not know it then, but Rosa was handing me the whole rest of my life in a diner kitchen off the highway, one slow afternoon at a time. I got a job in a real kitchen after that, in a city 200 miles from the mill town and 1,000 miles from Ashgrove. And I was good at it, and for the first time in my life, the thing that made me valuable was not a scholarship somebody could revoke or a bond somebody could deny. It was my own two hands and what they could do with them. I worked doubles, I worked holidays. I burned myself and learned the burns. I moved cities when a better kitchen called, and then moved again. And somewhere in the second year, the ache under my collarbone stopped running my days and became just a thing I carried. The way you carry a scar you stop noticing until the weather turns. I was building something. And the astonishing part, the part the girl in the borrowed gown would not have believed, was that I was building it entirely out of myself. By the 5th year, I had a name. Not a famous one. I'm a chef, not a celebrity. But in the world that matters to people who care about food, people knew my cooking. I had opened a small restaurant in the city with a partner I trusted, and a line out the door on the weekends, and a review in a paper that mattered. A review that used the word revelatory, about a woman who had once mopped a dining hall floor for her meals. I had a staff who respected me and regulars who knew my name, and a life that was, from the ground up, entirely and defiantly my own. Nobody had handed it to me on sufferance. Nobody could revoke it. I had built a whole world where the word scholarship meant nothing, and I lived in it, and it was warm. And I had almost stopped thinking about her. I could go weeks, I could go a whole month, buried in service and inventory and the beautiful punishing rhythm of a kitchen. And then some night, I would step out the back door into the alley to breathe, and the wind would come cold off the water, carrying a smell of cedar and clean snow, and I would be 21 years old again on a wet stone floor with a mop in my hands, and the most impossible person in the world crossing the room toward me. And I would put my hand over the mark that had never once faded in 5 years, and I would think, "You still didn't let me go, did you?" And I could never tell, standing in that alley, whether I was talking to her or to myself. I have to tell you about her 5 years too, the ones I didn't watch, the ones I only learned later, in pieces, but which you should have now, so the kneeling lands the way it landed on me. Marlowe married the Callaway heir 8 weeks after graduation. It was in the papers, the merger, the alliance, the cold, beautiful wedding that saved the family fortune. The 2 great houses joined, the photographs of a bride with ice blue eyes and a smile that did not reach them. Her mother got exactly what she had paid for with my heart: solvency, alliance, a daughter safely married to the right bloodline. Vivian Ashgrove closed the deal and balanced the books and considered the matter of the scholarship Omega permanently resolved. But you cannot bond twice. That is the thing Vivian, for all her cold arithmetic, could not put on a balance sheet. An alpha who has marked her mate cannot unmark, cannot remark, cannot give to another person the thing she already gave away in a frozen boathouse, to a girl who smelled like home. Marlowe stood at an altar and signed the merger and saved her family. And she did it with a dead bond around her own throat, married to a woman she could not scent, a woman whose presence her body read as static, as absence, as wrong. By every account, it was one of the loneliest marriages anyone who saw it up close had ever witnessed. 2 people in a beautiful cold house, one of them running a company by day and coming home each night to a person she had no way to want, because the wanting had all been spent, in secret, on me. She had gotten, in other words, exactly the cold, beautiful nothing her mother had promised her she would get if she chose warmth over the family. That was Vivian's final cruelty, the one even she may not have fully intended. She had made Marlowe trade the one real thing for 4 years of solvency, and the 4 years of solvency turned out to be worth precisely as much as everything money is worth to a person who has cut out her own heart to pay for it, which is nothing. Marlowe kept the company alive. She lost the only warmth she had ever let herself have, and she learned, slowly, in a cold marriage in a cold house, exactly what her mother had spent 30 years teaching her, that this was what warmth cost, and that she had been a fool for one winter To think she could afford it. The marriage ended in the 4th year, quietly, the way rich, cold things end. A dissolution, a settlement, a single line in the business section of a paper. The Callaway Alliance had done its work. The family was solvent. The marriage had served its structural purpose and was permitted to expire, the way a bridge is dismantled once the army has crossed. And Vivian Ashgrove, having spent her daughter's one chance at a warm life to buy 4 years of a healthy balance sheet, simply moved on to arranging the next useful thing, as though a person's whole heart were a line of credit you draw down and then refinance. She never once, as far as I ever learned, considered that she had done anything but win. And Marlowe, 28 and free and frostbitten now all the way through, went back to running the company alone, in the cold house, with the dead bond she still wore around her throat. And she never came to find me. I used to wonder about that, in the years after, on the nights the cedar wind found me in the alley. She knew where I was. My name was on a restaurant. She could have walked in any evening of any of those years and said a single true word to me. And she never did. I know why now. I did not know it then. And it made me hate her worse. But I know it now. She thought she had bought me a clean, free, open future by burning herself out of it in public, and she thought that staying gone, staying silent, never once darkening the door of the life I'd built, was the very last kind thing she had left in the world that she was allowed to give me. I found out later that she had come closer than simply staying gone. In the 3rd year, on a night I will never remember because to me it was only a Tuesday service, Marlowe drove to my city. She parked across the street from the restaurant in the rain, and she sat in her car, and she watched the warm gold light of it, the full tables, the line, the whole life I had built. And she watched me through the front window in my whites, laughing at something a cook had said, alive and well and entirely without her. And she did not come in. She told me all of this much later, and I asked her why, and she said, "Because you were laughing. You had built a place where you got to laugh, and I was the reason you'd had to build it somewhere I wasn't." And she drove 3 hours home in the rain, and she told no one. And she kept wearing the mark under her collar, and she waited 2 more years for a reason she'd be allowed to come back. The reunion invitation came in the spring of the 5th year, on heavy cream cardstock with the Ashgrove crest embossed at the top, forwarded 3 times before it finally found me at the restaurant. And under it, the location, the rotunda. They were holding it in the rotunda, of course they were. The same marble room, the same floor, under the same great dome where I had stood in a borrowed gown and been unmade in 11 seconds in front of 400 people. I stood in my own kitchen holding that card with my hands still smelling of garlic and rosemary and hot iron, and every single sensible thing I had built in 5 years said the same word. Throw it in the trash. You have made a whole life out of never going back. Do not set 1 foot near that marble for a party. And then I thought about the 11 seconds. I stood there in my warm, loud kitchen, and I let myself think, all the way through, about 400 people making that low, delighted sound while the scholarship girl learned her place. I thought about all of them, the ones with the coats and the ski trips and the pitying diagnosis of a word, grown up now, successful now, gathered under that dome to hold champagne and measure their lives against each other's. And I thought, with a clarity that had been 5 years arriving, they got to watch me fall, every one of them. And something in me that had been quiet and hard and bright for 5 years, something built out of doubles and burns and a review that said revelatory, said very simply, go back. Not for her, for the girl in the borrowed gown who didn't cry. So I went. And I did not borrow the gown this time. I bought a dress the exact deep green of my own eyes, the green that used to catch the observatory light on the coldest nights, and it fit like something made for a woman who no longer apologized for taking up room. I did my own hair, the way I liked it. I drove myself in my own car that I had paid for with my own 2 hands, up the long tree-lined drive to Ashgrove Academy, past the library the Ashgroves had endowed, past the observatory where a cold girl had once opened the roof to the stars and told me I smelled like home. I parked, and I sat for a moment in the dark with my hand flat over the mark that had never faded, and I said to the girl in the borrowed gown, "Watch this." And I got out of the car and I walked into the rotunda. I want to describe the exact moment I walked in because I earned it, and I am going to keep it for the rest of my life. The rotunda was full, cocktail lights spilling gold off the marble, a string quartet in the corner, 400 grown versions of the children who had watched me fall, holding champagne under the same enormous dome. And I walked in alone, in my green dress, and I did not scan the crowd for her. And I did not shrink, and I did not do the thing the scholarship girl had done for 4 years, which was make herself small and grateful at the edge of a room she'd been let into on sufferance. I walked to the center of the floor, the exact center, the precise spot on the marble where I had stood in the borrowed gown and been told I was nothing. And I took a glass of champagne from a passing tray with a hand that did not shake, and I turned slowly, and I let the whole room notice that the scholarship case had come back. The room noticed. I watched it happen in ripples across 400 faces. The turn of a head, the lean of one person toward another, the whispered wait, is that? The visible recalculation. And then the strangest thing, the thing I had braced for cruelty and gotten the opposite of, they came over to be warm. The ones who had made that low, delighted sound 5 years ago crossed the marble now with bright, easy faces and told me they'd read the review. They'd been meaning to book for months. They'd always known, hadn't they, that I had something special. I was gracious. I was genuinely, easily gracious to every one of them because I had learned a thing in 5 years that the girl in the borrowed gown never got the chance to learn. That the people who are cruel to you when you are down are almost never brave, and that the surest, quietest revenge on a coward is simply to grow into someone she now has to flatter. There was one of them in particular, a woman named Coralie, who had 5 years before been the loudest of the low, delighted sound, who had once knocked my tray of punch to the floor at a winter formal and laughed while I knelt to clean it. She came over with the widest, brightest smile of all of them and clasped my hand in both of hers and said she was just so proud of me, that the whole class had followed my rise, that we simply had to stay in touch. And I looked at her expensive smile and her frightened eyes, and I understood that she did not remember the punch, that people like Coralie never remember the punch, that the cruelty had cost her nothing, and so she had spent nothing, and so she had nothing to feel. And I smiled, and I said it had been lovely to see her, and I moved on, because the best thing I could do to Coralie was let her feel forever that I had already forgotten her, which, in every way that mattered, I finally had. The dean was there too, older now, grayer, the same man who had handed me my diploma 5 years before without once lifting his eyes to mine. He found me by the tall windows, and this time he made himself look at me, and he said quietly that he had thought about that graduation morning more times than I would ever believe, that he had known even then that something wrong was happening on his marble floor, and had been too much of a coward and too fond of the Ashgrove endowment to stop it. I could have been cruel to him. I had earned the right to it. But I looked at this tired old man who had carried a small private shame for 5 years over a girl he had assumed he would never have to see again. And I found that I no longer needed his shame the way I had once needed his approval. "You could meet my eyes now," I told him. "That's something." And I left him with that, which was heavier than any anger I could have handed him, and truer. And then the room changed temperature, and I did not have to turn around to know why. You do not forget a scent you have carried under your collarbone for 5 years, cold cedar, clean snow, something warmer underneath, banked low like a fire behind glass. It came across that marble room the way it had once come across an empty dining hall, and every animal thing in me that I had spent 5 years patiently teaching to sleep woke up at once and turned toward the door, like a needle finding north, before my mind had even understood what my body already knew. And the bond mark at my throat, the one that was supposed to have faded, the one I had put my hand over 10,000 nights in an alley off a kitchen, went hot. Went hot the way it had not gone hot in 5 years. Went hot like it had never for one single day stopped waiting. I turned around. I made myself do it slowly, the way I had learned to do everything that mattered, with control, with intention, on my own time and no one else's. And there she was, across the rotunda, framed in the exact doorway she had walked away from me through 5 years before. Marlowe Ashgrove, 29 now, and thinner than she had been. The blue-black hair shorter, the ice-blue eyes finding me across 400 people, the way they had once found me across a wet stone floor at midnight. And I watched it hit her. I watched the scent reach her, the way hers had just reached me. I watched the frost of Ashgrove, the woman who had turned her back on me without so much as a flicker, go absolutely rigid 3 feet inside the door, one hand rising halfway to her own throat, to her own collarbone, to the mark I understood in that instant she was wearing too. And for one long second, the whole cold architecture of her face simply fell down, and she looked at me across that room the way a drowning person looks at the shore. She crossed the room. I want to be precise about this, because every single person there saw it, and it is the whole reversal of my life folded into 30 feet of marble. Marlowe Ashgrove, who had once walked away from me across this exact floor to reach her mother's side, crossed it now toward me, through the middle of the reunion, past the champagne and the string quartet, and the 400 grown children who had watched me fall, not one of whom she so much as glanced at, though every one of them was staring. And she did not stop until she stood directly in front of me in the dead center of the rotunda, close enough now that the scent was overwhelming, close enough that I could see her hands were shaking. The room had gone silent around us in a widening ring, the way a room goes still when it senses it is about to witness something. "You can't take it off," I said. My voice was steady. I was proud of that then, and I am proud of it now. That's how bonds work. And I watched it land in her like a blow. And I did not soften it, because I had driven 3 hours and waited 5 years to say exactly that, standing on exactly this floor. But she did not flinch away from it, and she did not deflect it, and she did not manage it. And that was the first thing that told me something in her had genuinely changed, because the old Marlowe deflected everything, managed everything, and this Marlowe simply stood in the center of the rotunda and took every word of it. And then she said the thing that split the whole story open in front of everyone. "I know why you hate me," she said, "but you don't know why I did it." And then, in the dead center of the rotunda, in front of the entire class of the year that had watched me fall, Marlowe Ashgrove told them the truth. All of it. She did not lower her voice. She told them about the observatory and the boathouse and the frozen lake. She told them about the bond and the mark and the winter. She told them about her mother in the cold glass office at the top of the tower, and the Callaway merger, and the family 3 months from ruin, and the folder of photographs turned around on the desk. She told them about the red flag already prepared on a scholarship file, one signature away from ending my life and my mother's, and about the choice that was not a choice, the version of me she got to keep, or the version of me that got to live. "I didn't tutor her," she said, and her voice did not shake anymore. It rang. It carried all the way up into the marble dome and back down onto 400 silent people. I loved her. I bonded her in a boathouse in February, and I meant it more than I have ever meant anything. And then I stood right here on this exact spot, and I said the cruelest thing I could invent. And I turned my back on her in front of all of you, on purpose, because a clean, ugly public ending was the only thing that would make my mother believe the bond was dead and let her live a free life. I burned down the only real thing I have ever had, in front of every one of you. so that the woman I loved could walk out of here with a future my mother couldn't touch. It was the worst thing I have ever done, and I would do it again. You could have heard a pin drop onto that marble. 400 people who had come to compare their careers and their spouses and their houses stood perfectly, absolutely still, holding champagne they had entirely forgotten, watching the Frost of Ashgrove take herself apart in public with the same total control she had once used on this same floor to take me apart. And I stood in the center of it, in my green dress, with her scent all around me and her mark hot on my throat, and 5 years of a life I had built with my own 2 hands standing solid at my back. And I felt, for the first time in my life, the entire shape of my own power, because I understood, in that ringing silence, what she was actually doing. She had not crossed that floor to be forgiven. She knew better than to expect it. She had crossed it to give me back the 11 seconds, in the exact room where she had taken them, whether or not it bought her a single thing in return. I asked her. It was the only question that mattered, and I asked it clearly so the room could hear that too. You've known where I was for years. My name is on a restaurant. You could have walked in any night and said all of this to me alone, in the quiet, where it cost you nothing. Why here? And Marlowe Ashgrove looked slowly around the silent rotunda, at the marble her family had paid for, at the great dome, at the exact spot on the floor under our feet. And then she looked back at me, and she said, "Because I didn't take it from you in private. I took it from you here, in front of all of them." And this is the part I will tell my grandchildren, the part the entire class of that year still talks about at every reunion since, the coldest alpha any of us had ever known. The last heir of the family the school itself was named for, went down, in the center of the rotunda, on the marble her family's money had laid, in front of 400 people. Marlowe Ashgrove went down onto one knee, and a sound moved through the crowd, not the low, delighted sound of 5 years before, but its exact opposite, a soft, collective intake of breath, the sound a room makes when it watches something it did not know it would ever get to see. She knelt on her family's own floor, and she bowed her head, and for a moment she said nothing at all, and the whole rotunda held its breath and waited. She did not propose. I want to be clear about that, because everyone always assumes she did, and the truth is so much better. She knelt, and she looked up at me, and she said, "I am not asking you to take me back. I don't think you should. I bought you a future by breaking your heart in front of all these people, and I have no right at all to walk into that future now that it has turned out so beautiful without me. I'm not kneeling to ask you for anything. I'm kneeling because 5 years ago, I made this entire room watch you be told you were nothing. And I need this entire room to watch me tell you the truth. You are the only real thing I have ever had in my life. I threw you out into the cold to keep you safe from my mother. And there has not been one single warm day since. That's all. You don't owe me an answer." And she stayed there, on one knee on the cold marble, head bowed, waiting for nothing, having finally, 5 years too late, made herself exactly as public as the wound. I looked down at her, and I want to tell you honestly what I felt, because it was not what I had rehearsed on the long drive up through the dark. I had rehearsed something cold and final. I had rehearsed the perfect reversal, the scholarship Omega who built a whole life turning her back on the Alpha the way the Alpha had once turned hers, walking out of the rotunda a second time and leaving her kneeling there, giving the 400 people the clean ending where I win, and she loses, and the ledger balances at last. And I could have. That was the thing I understood completely, standing over her in my green dress. I could walk away right now, and the power was entirely, wholly mine. She had handed it to me herself, on one knee, in front of everyone. Nothing about the life I had built required her. There was a line out the door of it. I did not need one single cold thing from the Ashgrove family ever again. I could turn around and leave her on her mother's marble, and it would be just, And not one person in that room would have blamed me. But I have spent 5 years learning to be honest with myself in a way that the girl in the borrowed gown never got the chance to be. And so I am going to be honest with you. The mark on my throat was hot. It had been hot since the second she walked in the door. And a severed bond does not do that. A dead bond does not do that. A bond only stays alive on both ends, when both people, somewhere underneath all the ruin they've buried it under, never actually let go. And mine had been quietly, stubbornly hot for 5 years in an alley off a kitchen, and hers, I now knew, had been dead cold and worn anyway for 5 years in a marriage that could not touch it. And the two of us had spent half a decade carrying the exact same unkillable thing in 2 entirely different kinds of dark, each of us completely certain that we carried it alone. And so, standing over her, I discovered that I did not actually want the cold, perfect revenge. I had thought I did. I had wanted it for 5 years, in the diner and the kitchens and the alley, but with the truth finally out in the open, in the exact room that needed to hear it, with her kneeling on the marble and the mark hot at my throat, and every animal thing in me turned toward her like a needle. I found that what I wanted was not to win. Winning was easy. Winning was already done. I had won the moment I walked in the door in a dress the color of my own eyes. What I wanted, it turned out, standing at the very center of my own power with the whole room holding its breath, was the one thing revenge could never give me. I wanted to stop being cold, so I did not walk away. But I did not fall into her arms either, because I am not the girl in the borrowed gown, and that girl is not the one who came back to Ashgrove. I reached down, and I took her chin in my hand, and I made her look up at me, the exact way she had once tipped my chin up on a dining hall floor at midnight, and I said, clearly, so the whole silent rotunda could hear it, because she had been right that it belonged to the room. Get up. I am not going to let you kneel on your mother's marble like she still owns the ground under it. She doesn't. And I pulled her to her feet in front of 400 people, and I did not let go of her hand. You don't get 5 years back, I said, quieter now, just for the two of us, though the room strained to hear it. And you don't get to have me the way you had me. That girl in the borrowed gown is gone. You helped make sure of that? But this one has a restaurant and a name, and a life she built out of 11 public seconds of being told she was nothing. And this one gets to choose. So I am choosing, not the version of you your mother made in a glass office, the one on her knees on this floor telling 400 people the truth. That one. Start there. We did not leave together that night. I want to tell you that we did, because it is the ending you want. And for a long time, it was the ending I wanted too. But the true ending is better, and I have stopped trading true things for pretty ones. I gave her the address of the restaurant, written on the back of a reunion program in my own hand, and I told her that if she meant one single word of what she had said on that marble, she could come and stand in my line like everyone else on a night of my choosing, and wait for a table, and earn one evening of my time, and then, and only then, we would see. And I walked out of that rotunda for the second time in my life. But this time, I walked out into applause, actual applause. 400 people who had come to watch each other and had instead watched a scholarship Omega refuse, twice, to be made small. And I did not stay to enjoy the sound, because I had a whole warm life to get back to that had never once required it. She came to the restaurant. She came on a Tuesday in the rain, in a plain dark coat, with no name on the list and no reservation, and no family standing behind her. And she stood in my line on the wet sidewalk for 2 hours like a person instead of an Ashgrove. And she did not send anyone in to mention who she was. And she did not leave when the rain got worse. And when she finally sat down at a small table near the kitchen, I sent the food out to her myself, course after course, the food I had built out of a mill town and a diner off a highway, and an old woman named Rosa, and 10,000 hours of my own 2 hands. And I let her taste, in silence, every single thing she had thrown me out into the cold to protect. It was the most honest conversation we had had in 5 years, and neither of us said a word through the whole of it. Near the end of the night, when the last of the line was gone, and the kitchen had gone quiet, and the rain had softened against the windows. I untied my apron, and I came out, and I sat down across from her at last, at the small table, over the wreck of the final plate. And Marlowe Ashgrove, the frost of Ashgrove, the woman I had never once in all our stolen winters seen actually smiled. A real one, slow and unpracticed, like a muscle she was using for the first time. And I told her, she said, that she has nothing left to take that I am willing to trade for. The company can burn. I already spent the one thing I couldn't afford to lose 5 years ago on this floor, and I am done letting her tell me what it was worth. It took a long time after that. I want to be honest about that too, because the pretty version skips it, and the pretty version is a lie. You do not undo 5 years and 11 seconds in a single rainy Tuesday, and I did not let her believe you could. And to her enormous credit, she never once asked to. She earned it slowly. A standing in the line that became a standing at the end of the bar. A single Tuesday that became a standing Tuesday. A cold air learning, for the first time in her whole managed life, how to want something out loud and in daylight and without her mother's permission. How to simply wait for someone warm without buying it, without managing it, without a single word from anyone about what the waiting was worth. She was not good at it at first. She had 30 years of frost to thaw, but she came every week, in the rain and out of it, and she stood in the line, and she earned it. There was a night, maybe 4 months into the line and the standing Tuesdays, when the last table ran long and I came out of the kitchen to find that Marlowe had, without being asked, quietly stacked the clean glasses and wiped down the end of the bar where she always sat. Small, useless, ordinary kitchen things, done a little badly, by a woman who had grown up with staff for exactly this. She saw me see it, and she flushed, the frost of Ashgrove caught being ordinary, and she started to apologize as though she had overstepped some line. And I crossed the empty restaurant, and I kissed her for the first time in 5 years, there in the low light with the chairs up on the tables and the rain soft on the glass. And I felt the mark at my throat go so warm I had to stop and breathe. She had learned to want out loud. She had learned to simply be near a warm thing and make herself useful to it, without buying it, without managing it, without a single word from anyone about what it was worth. It had taken her 30 years and 5 of them apart, but she had learned it, and I let her know she had, the only way that has ever mattered between us. Vivian Ashgrove did try to do it all again. Of course she did. A woman like that does not lose gracefully or even understand at first that she has lost. She made her calls, she found her levers, and she discovered, to her genuine bewilderment, that a woman with her own restaurant and her own name and her own 2 hands is a much, much harder thing to destroy than a scholarship girl in a borrowed gown. That there was no scholarship to revoke, no institution to lean on, no future she could poison from a glass office, because I had built the whole thing myself out of exactly the materials she could not touch. And she discovered something else too, something she had never once accounted for in 30 years of cold arithmetic, that a daughter who has already survived losing everything is simply not afraid of a mother's threats anymore. For the first time in either of our lives, Vivian Ashgrove reached for the cold lever and pulled it, and nothing happened. And she had to stand in her glass office and watch it not happen. And we let her watch. I run the restaurant still. It is mine. And it is warm, and it is full. And by the pass where I stand every service, there is exactly one framed thing on the wall. It is not a review, though I have far better ones now. It is not a photograph. It is my diploma from Ashgrove Academy, the one I picked up from a dean who could not meet my eyes and carried out of that rotunda into the cold 5 years before I ever went back. I hung it there on purpose at eye level where I have to see it 100 times a night because it reminds me of the girl in the borrowed gown who did not cry and of everything she built out of 11 public seconds of being told she was nothing. She is the one who deserves the credit for all of this. Not the reunion, not the marble, not the alpha who crossed a floor and knelt. Her. The girl who picked up her diploma and kept walking. Marlowe is here most nights now. She sits at the end of the bar where she can watch the kitchen through the pass, the way she once stood in a dining hall doorway in the dark and watched a girl mop a floor. And she waits for me to be done. And she has finally learned, a cold woman, taught late and taught slowly, how to simply be near something warm without needing to own it or explain it or justify its cost. The mark on my throat is warm all the time now, the way it was always meant to be. And hers is too, and neither of us tries to kill it anymore. People ask me sometimes, the regulars who know the whole story now, how I could ever have taken her back after what she did to me in that rotunda. And I tell them the truth, which is the only currency I trade in anymore. I didn't take her back. That is the thing they never quite understand, and it is the whole point. I did not take her back. She had to come and find the woman I built while she was gone, the one with the restaurant and the name and the diploma on the wall, and the mark that never once faded no matter how hard we both tried to kill it. And she had to stand in that woman's line, in the rain like everyone else, and earn one single evening, and then another, and then a Tuesday, and then a life. And that woman, the one who came back to Ashgrove in a green dress and refused to be small, she is the one who got to decide. Not the girl in the borrowed gown. The girl in the borrowed gown just had to survive long enough and keep walking long enough to grow into the woman who finally got to choose. And she did. I did. So that is the story of the 11 seconds and the 5 years, and the night the coldest alpha I ever loved crossed the marble of her own family's rotunda to kneel in front of everyone who had watched me fall. People think it's a story about revenge, and it isn't. I had every right to the cold, perfect revenge, and I stood over it with my hand under her chin, and I chose something warmer, because revenge is just being cold on purpose, and I was done being cold. People think it's a story about a scholarship girl and an heir, and it isn't quite that either. It is a story about a bond two people spent 5 years trying to kill from 2 different kinds of dark, and could not, because some things simply do not come off, no matter what lie you tell the person who gave them to you, or the person who has to wear one to keep you safe. She told me I was nothing, in front of 400 people, to save my life. And I went out into the cold and built a life so real, and so warm, and so entirely my own, that when she finally came back to tell the truth, I was the one holding every inch of the ground. That is not revenge. That is just what happens when you don't cry, and you keep walking, and you let the cold woman come all the way to you, and then you make her stand in the line,